Coming up on this week's podcast, Lewis Hamilton hits a new Ferrari low. Max Verstappen commits to Red Bull, but is ruled out of the title fight by Helmut Marko. Did Lando get lucky in Hungary? And should all eyes be on the fight for fifth? It's time for the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back on last weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix, the final race before what is now the F1 summer break. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by the dynamic duo that is 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Coop, and the man, the myth, the legend, who is not at an airport hotel, but is still in central Budapest, none other than lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, I've pointed out you are still very much in Budapest, in central Budapest, and we've got a situation with this podcast because of car parking. Can you please explain that to our viewers?
Yeah, basically, the car parking is street parking in central Budapest, which is notoriously difficult. And you have you're allowed a maximum of 3 hours. And I put the coins in the meter last night when I got back from the Grand Prix. And you are allowed overnight parking on a weekend, Saturday and Sunday night, but it kicks in again from 8 a.m. local time. And you're, as I say, 3 hours maximum. I've got till 11 a.m. local time. So we are recording this podcast at 10 past 10 local time. So I need to get this done in 45 minutes so I can go and put some more coins back in the meter for another hour before I check out of my apartment and go to the airport.
An important travel tip. Fun and games, an important travel point for anybody thinking of going to Budapest. We've also got to ask Ian very quickly, speaking about your travels, because Sam and I, in last week's fan questions video, were documenting your struggles in Brussels airport, if I'm correct. If you've not seen it already, go and watch last week's fan questions video, because we included an image Ian sent to us of just how bad the passport control line was. Can you just explain a little bit, very, very briefly, the difficulties you had getting home from Spa?
Yeah, so very quickly, because obviously people want to listen about Formula One, not about my travel issues, but very quickly, got to Brussels airport, got through the security section, still had an hour and 5 minutes to my flight, joined the most ginormous passport control queue I have ever seen across all my travels. It has to be said, all my years of traveling, my 300 plus Grand Prix or something that I've done around now. And basically it was slow. It took ages. It was pretty evident being in the queue, I was going to miss my flight. No doubt about it. And then all of a sudden, with about 15 minutes to go to my flight, and I'd probably got about another 30 minutes to go in the passport control queue, a text message came up saying, your flight is delayed by 25 minutes. Oh my God, what a relief. Got through passport control, just got to the gate just as it was closing. So that gives you some idea. Even with that delay, I got there just as the gate was closing and just got home. Otherwise, I'd have been spending another night in Brussels.
The fun and games of being an F1 journalist, jetting across. The reason I asked you about that is actually a lot of people reach out to Racing News 365 after doing that fan questions video asking if you made your flight. So that's the reason I asked that. People care. Our followers care. Sam, how are you, my friend?
Yes, I'm very well.
Any struggles with travelling?
No, not in the last week, I don't think. I'll have a think, but yeah, I think, as far as I can remember, my week's been pretty ordinary compared to that. Yeah, but if something eventful happens, I will let you know.
Right, well, let's crack on.
Moving swiftly on to Formula
One and our fun question following the Hungarian Grand Prix, and it's about Lewis Hamilton. I like this question to the point it may need to be an article very soon on Racing News 365. Keep your eyes out. In the current regulations, so since the start of the 2022 season, how many races has Lewis Hamilton been a classified finisher outside the points? So how many races since 2022 has Lewis been classified as a finisher, but outside the points? And of course, he finished 12th in Hungary, the reason for this question. So there's one automatically.
I mean, I have no idea. It's going to be a guess for me. Ian's
I'm going to go working out. Yeah, I'm going to go about 52.
52 outside the points.
Outside the point. Classified finishes in the last 4 years.
Sorry, I thought. Yeah, I didn't. Sorry. Sorry. I think I was thinking.
I think I should take that.
Take first answer.
Classified outside the points.
Outside the points.
And 25. He had 25. Sam.
I'm going 9. I think it's quite low.
You're both wrong. Sam's closest. It is 4. Only 4 races has Lewis Hamilton been a classified finisher outside the points. It was Imola 2022, Abu Dhabi 2022, where actually he had a gearbox failure, so didn't do the last 3 laps, but was a classified finisher, as obviously completed more than 90% of the race.
Rule again.
Well, what can I say? There was Qatar 2024, and of course now Hungary 2025. So despite the difficulties he's had under the current regulations, very sorry, Lewis, only 4 times he's not finished in the points, which is quite interesting. Anyways, moving on very quickly. Sam, what was your biggest takeaway from the Hungarian Grand Prix?
I mean, aside from Lewis, and we'll get onto that because that was a whole weekend talking point. For me, it was just how entertaining McLaren are allowing this title fight to be. I was quite critical earlier in the year about how they needed to add variance. They needed to take the risk because otherwise, I think it was after the Japanese Grand Prix where they didn't roll the dice and they lost the race to Max Verstappen. What we saw is the complete antithesis of that in Hungary, where they did risk, and actually, if you look on social media, evidently did invoke the anger of certain fan bases by rolling the dice strategy-wise. Oscar fans are quite aggrieved by that, even though the 2-stop is the conventional optimal strategy. But I think it will be a really interesting title fight because they're going to let them race. Even as close as Oscar got to ploughing into the back of Lando there, Andrea Stella was very cool, calm, collected about it after the race as well. Was like, it was firm and fair in terms of racing. So I think, the biggest take home for me is that this is going to go down to the wire and it's going to be incredibly entertaining.
Mine's on a similar point, but I actually believe that Oscar was hard done by, and I think he has a right to feel that way. As we can explain later on, we discuss McLaren. But what I thought was even more interesting was Oscar's reaction off camera after the race in Park Fermé, where he was smiling away. He didn't seem to give a care in the world that he'd lost out to Lando, but I think it's almost a sign of him. Again, maybe I've read this completely wrong, but to me, it kind of, the way he was smiling kind of came across as maybe Oscar thinking, okay, Lando, you can have this one. It was outside my control. I could do nothing about you having the 1 stop. I'll get you next time. Because what was interesting is that Lando had the pace on Friday in particular, to the point he was kind of the favourite for pole, ended up qualifying in 3rd behind Oscar as well, when Oscar actually had the best race pace. So I think there's still another level to come from Oscar in the final 10 rounds, which I think is going to be very interesting to see. But again, we'll discuss McLaren much more later on. Ian, what was your biggest takeaway from the Hungaroring?
Quite a number of points, but I think for me, I remember saying in the podcast ahead of the Belgian Grand Prix that with Red Bull bringing upgrades to its car for both Belgium and Hungary, as we knew at that particular time, saying that these 2 races will make or break for Max Verstappen and his title hopes. And going on I'm just doing a nice little graphic there for anybody that can see on the video. And basically saying that these 2 races will make or break. They would define the rest of the season for him. And coming out of these 2 races, depending on his position, whether he might still be in a shot of being world champion, I think it is now pretty evident that the reign of Max Verstappen will be coming to an end at some point later this season. He goes into the summer break 97 points adrift. That is effectively 4 Grand Prix victories, which with 10 Grand Prix remaining, it is going to take one almighty collapse and numerous crashes between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri wiping each other out on several occasions for Max Verstappen to have any hope of being crowned a 5-time world champion in 2025. It's not going to happen. I think Max obviously appreciates that. I think many people inside Red Bull can now appreciate that this title is gone.
It was weird even saying that, Max not being a title fight. We've not said
I
that for so many
appreciate the
years.
Points are still there. Yeah, the points are still there on the table. And obviously, whilst the points are on the table, mathematics will always dictate that you can never be ruled out. But unfortunately, we know that we're coming to the end of the updates, the upgrades on the car, and McLaren is just too good. 2-horse race.
A 10-point swing over Oscar every round is it's just not realistic, is it?
It's not. But weird things have happened.
First and third, and Lando not being in the mix as well. So
But if there is any driver you can never rule out until it is mathematically impossible, it's Max Verstappen. Putting it in. Anyways, very, very quickly, let's look back at our predictions from the Hungarian Grand Prix. And it was not the best effort, mixed. I've got to say. It was mixed. Charles Leclerc claiming pole kind of ruined all of our weekends because nobody got that correct. Nobody got the fastest lap correct. Nobody got the fastest pit stop correct. George Russell. George Russell. Okay. What was interesting as well with the fastest pit stop, obviously none of us got it, but we actually had in Hungary the 3 fastest pit stops of 2025 so far. McLaren did 2 1.94 second pit stops. Red Bull did a 1.97 second pit stop, which has destroyed Ferrari's reign. So they've got to come back out fighting to claim the Pirelli fastest pit stop award come the end of the year. In terms of then the points, there was some points awarded for the top 3 positions. Sarah from Germany representing the fans picked up 4 points for correctly guessing Lando Norris as the winner. And Oscar Piastri in third, of course, as our rules state, you get a point if you predict a driver 1 place above or below where they actually finished. So Sarah got 4 points. I came in third with 5 points for getting Russell in third, yay. And then Piastri and Norris, but in the wrong order. And then Sam and Ian, you both got 6 points for getting Norris and Piastri bang on in first and second. So it means that going into the summer break, the leaderboard for the Racing News 365 predictions that everyone cares about is Sam in last on 65 points. The fans in third on 66. I'm second on 67.
Okay,
it was very close there. And then 25 points in the lead on 92 is Mr. Ian Parks. But there's still a lot of points up for grabs, of course. So don't get excited too quickly, and we are coming after you. Anyways,
do we write off all your title chances like we've just written off Max Verstappen?
No, I'm going to play it, cool, calm and collected. There's still time. 10 rounds.
Only way that there is.
Lots of predictions to go, and I'm ultimately in control of the predictions. So who knows? Maybe we can
it's just 2.5 points around, Nick. Just 2.5 points around.
All it is. Quick maths. Anyways, right. Let's discuss a driver who would probably quite like some points at the moment, and that is Lewis Hamilton. And it's remarkable, isn't it, that you only go back 7 months, and we had the unveiling of Lewis at Maranello and all the media around it, arguably more media than probably F1 has ever seen for an individual event. Just the magnitude of it. Fast forward to Hungary and the comments he came out with on Saturday that he was useless and, the Ferrari needed a new driver. Then doubling down on those comments on Sunday after, another difficult race, saying that it's just his feeling at the moment. There's stuff going on behind the scenes. Then having to basically confirm that he will be in the car in Zandvoort, which, Ian, it's remarkable to think just how much has changed in 7 months from the highs of what we saw in January and the unveiling and that famous picture. And then now to what he came out with over the weekend and confirming that he's still going to be in F1, basically. It's a dramatic change, isn't it?
Do you know what? I'm genuinely not surprised by Lewis's performance. I'm maybe a little bit surprised by the comments that he came out with over the weekend. Be so negative, that negative. But in terms of the performance, I'm not surprised. You guys know that I've said from day one this season, after Lewis joined Ferrari, that this year was going to be an integration year for Lewis. Him getting to know the team, their processes, their ways of working, getting a handle on his new race engineering. We've had stories around that earlier this season with a little bit of difficulty and conflict that he had with Riccardo Adami early on. So it was always going to be a long process for Lewis to understand and appreciate what it takes to be a Ferrari driver, to work within the Ferrari organization, bearing in mind just how long he had been with Mercedes. I'm not saying Lewis had become institutionalized at Mercedes, but we've already got an idea from what he said most recently that in terms of him handing over these documents, he's put together these documents and he's handed them across to Fred Vasseur and the rest of the senior management in terms of how he feels things should be done in comparison to the way it was at Mercedes, because he just feels that there are some ways of working at Ferrari that just do not flow. So, as I say, just to reiterate, I'm not surprised by the performance that he's struggled with so far. Again, because we know he's struggled with these ground effect cars pretty much from day one. but I was just a little bit surprised at the strength of his comments. Yes, it was a difficult weekend, exacerbated by the fact that he got knocked out in Q2 and his teammate went on to take pole position. Two things around that. Lewis was only a tenth and a half behind Charles in Q2. Charles came that close as well to being knocked out. And it was only by the grace of God and an act of wind, bearing in mind how severely that wind direction changed during the course of Q3, that allowed Charles at the right time to net pole position and defeat the McLarens, who were caught out by that wind directional change. So it was all circumstances that played into what happened in qualifying. But yes, for Lewis then to come out with such strong comments, we know he's going to turn for. He's not going to just throw in the towel, is he? But nevertheless, yes, he needs to get his mindset now retuned over the summer break. He's talked about being with his kids, his nephews, etc., and he's certain there's going to be some tears over that break because he knows he's not doing what he wants to do. But hopefully he will come back fighting, re-energized, his brain retuned to having a much stronger post-summer break period.
Because Sam, even though, yes, Lewis could put full focus on 2026 because the kind of general expectation is that the new regulations might suit his driving style better compared to the current regulations, which we know has not suited the way Lewis likes to drive a car. But he's still got obviously 10 rounds he's got to get through this season with this current car, whether he likes the car or not. And arguably, is he the driver on the grid, do you think, that needs this summer break more than anybody else?
Listening to him, it certainly sounds that is the case. He's definitely going through it. He's wearing his heart on his sleeve. It points out some of the kind of the I say highlights in terms of what he said over the weekend. It started on Thursday by talking about as Ian points out, that there'll be tears over the summer break, which he did highlight is healthy. It's obviously a process he needs to go through. He needs to kind of let that emotion out. But then for him then to respond to those setbacks over the weekend in the way that he did. Ian mentioned earlier in the year about some of his comments and feeling like that was the kind of most emotional or most reactive he'd been. I think this is probably now a new apex in terms of that. I think this was very, very kind of enlightening as to kind of his state of mind and how he's feeling. He's very cryptic as well, talking about things going on behind the scenes. So I think, yes, he is that driver who kind of most needs that summer break. But I also think he's the driver who most needs those 10 rounds because as almost the entire paddock starts to turn to 2026, and Lewis will be from a mechanical fundamental on track, kind of this is what I need to prepare for this new era. He'll be doing that. But he has 10 races to, again, fully immerse himself with the team, but learn the processes, learn the personnel, and fully kind of embed himself. So that's really important for him. In some ways, it's almost a blessing that there's a new era because he doesn't need to worry about the results. He just needs to worry about the processes, and it can be a more productive environment for him in that sense. So, I think in many ways that is an advantage for Lewis, but also it's very difficult to count him out heading into 2026 because we know we're moving away from the ground effect era. He struggled massively with these cars. He might struggle with the next generation. You never know. But you might see the Lewis from yesteryear that was, so comfortable and so adept with what he was doing and how he was able to set up the car and control the car and feel the car. So, I think it's very early to say Lewis is done. I think this is just, in many ways, him venting. But the summer break will be critical for him to reset.
Yeah, of course. And for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let's know your thoughts on Lewis's opening half of the season at Ferrari and anything we discuss in this podcast, your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And likewise, if you're listening to this podcast on whatever podcast platform you get your podcast, then jump onto YouTube and let us know your thoughts. It is always amazing to hear your thoughts, particularly now we're in the summer break. We've got lots of time to discuss so many topics. But let's move on to Max.
Nick, just very quickly, tell people how close we are, though, to a real landmark moment.
Oh, yes. Well, we are about 30,000 downloads away from 1 million downloads, which would be a massive thing for us to hit. With this episode, why not? There's the pressure, guys. Download this podcast, please, so we can hit that 1 million. That'd be a nice boost
pressure
to go into the summer.
Going into the summer break.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, it's down to us to do a good episode for the listeners and the viewers to enjoy. But let's move on to Max Verstappen, because obviously, if we roll our minds back, cast our minds back to the start of the Hungarian Grand Prix, and of course, Max committed his future to Red Bull for at least 2026, probably this time next year. We'll have the same rumours linking him to somewhere else for 2027. But let's get
unless Red Bull is like flying again next season.
Let's get to that time first. But yes, he has committed his future to Red Bull for 2026. So that in itself, big boost to the team, knowing they have got Max definitely for the start of the new regulations, and of course Red Bull being a powertrain supplier. That's obviously one side of this conversation. The other side is where Max now finds himself this season, because of course we have always said that you cannot rule out Max until it's mathematically impossible. One other person who has always refused to rule Max out is Red Bull's motorsport advisor Helmut Marko. However, for the first time this year, Marko, after Hungary, has said that Max's title chances are now clearly impossible. That alone is pretty striking. But is this a point now, Ian, that with Max, committed to Red Bull for next year, Marko pointing out the title is done, Max also pointing out that, he doesn't think he'll win another race this year, that nothing works on the car. Do they actually now need to use this as a platform to fully focus on next year and kind of forget about this season now?
Well, they're not going to forget about it, because we know from Helmut, once again, who was very effusive over the weekend, it has to be said, with various comments and interviews that he made, that there's going to be another upgrade on that Red Bull post-summer break. So it shows that they're not throwing in the towel completely. Got to think as well that one of the reasons behind that is the Constructors' Championship. Okay, done and dusted. With regard to the title, we know where that's going. How many points did you say, Nick? McLaren were ahead?
McLaren are 299 points ahead of Ferrari.
299 points ahead of Ferrari. However, when you look at it very quickly call this up, between Ferrari and Red Bull, there are only 66 points. So that's a lot of money. We're talking second to fourth, we're talking somewhere in the region of about $20 to $25 million. That gives you some idea as to why Red Bull are not going to throw in the towel just yet on the Constructors' Championship, because they know that they've got that to play for. So, and obviously Max is not going to just, thanks ever so much, I'm going on holiday now, guys, till 2026. I'm just going to poot around. My title chances are gone. Of course not. He's committed now to Red Bull for this season, as we know, committed to Red Bull for next season. And there's a lot at stake. He's going to want to do it for the team, even if he cannot do it for himself this season by becoming drivers' champion. So there is still a lot at stake for Red Bull. But right now, we know it's had a really difficult car all season long. Helmut Marko turned around and said post-race on Sunday in Budapest, now the tyres are at fault. Basically blaming the tyres across the course of the weekend, that they just couldn't get those in the right window. We also know as well that the Hungaroring is not a good track for Red Bull. Historically, for the most part anyway, it's never been a really good track for them. So no surprise, given the difficulties with that car that they've had this season, that they weren't able to get it working properly for Max and Yuki across the weekend. So bottom line though, of course, they have still got something to fight and play for, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, and just before we move on to McLaren, obviously, I actually want to ask you, Sam, about Yuki Tsunoda, because on the topic of Red Bull, Yuki, it was a fourth Q1 exit in the last 8 races, but actually was, only a tenth and a half slower than Max in Q1. And genuinely, despite the fact, again, he wasn't in the points across the entire weekend, was much closer, probably arguably the closest he's been to Max pace-wise. How difficult do you think it is for Yuki that, despite the fact of the position he's in, so being dumped out in Q1, obviously finishing well outside the points, how difficult is it, do you think, for him to process the position he's in, but actually realise the fact that, I am getting closer to Max?
Well, he spoke about being proud of his progress over the weekend, and that was in, after qualifying, in which he'd get, again, as you point out, being consigned to a fourth Q1 knockout in 8 races, which, obviously, quick math, 50% strike rate of going out in Q1, not great for a Red Bull driver, regardless of how difficult that car might be to drive. So I think he'll be okay, because of he's clearly looking at things sunny side up, isn't he? He's very much, look, this is what I can control now. This is what I can focus on. The lack of points is obviously a huge concern. And that is something the team will have to address over the summer, because it's going to be very difficult for Max to carry that team by himself. I mean, as he has done all year so far, but to continue to do that is going to be increasingly difficult over the final 10 rounds. I think the change in management has come at a really good time for Yuki just before the summer break. It probably makes him feel more reassured in his position at the team. And also he's working with a known entity in Laurent Mekies. So it will almost be like, this kind of nice comforting kind of security blanket for him in many ways, because Laurent knows exactly what he's capable of. And he was performing very, very well in the Racing Bull before he moved up to Red Bull. And it could be his saving grace ultimately. So I think we could well see a more equal approach from Red Bull, as we're already starting to see only over 2 rounds. That could be critical for Yuki in not only his confidence, whether he stays a Red Bull or not. It could be incredibly critical to the future of his F1 career.
I think, just want to quickly add, I think Laurent Mekies is in an absolutely remarkable position that he's got 3 drivers there who, as Sam has just pointed out, he knows very well. Obviously, he's worked with Yuki all last season, and now he's working with Yuki again, so he knows exactly what Yuki's all about. But of course, he's worked with Isaac Hadjar for half a season, and of course, he worked with Liam Lawson at the end of last season, and of course, has worked with Liam Lawson most recently, prior to him getting promoted from Racing Bulls to Red Bull. So he's got this wide overarching picture of all 3 drivers. He will know their strengths, their weaknesses. And he's got, as I say, he's in a lucky position in one respect, that he's got this bag of riches that he can choose from for that second seat for next year. But also it's a very difficult decision still to make as to who he feels should be Max Verstappen's teammate in 2026.
It'll be interesting when they decide to make that decision, because see, you'd imagine they probably want a bit of a head start. Yeah,
it's going to be late in the season. Wouldn't be surprised if it was at the end of the season, actually.
That's a good call.
Which they've done quite a lot, to be fair.
They have.
Over the last few years.
Right. McLaren. And Sam, I'll come to you first on McLaren, because my question is going to kind of link to your biggest takeaway, because looking at it, it was interesting some of the wording that came out, and, McLaren openly accepted that, it was a gamble to put Lando on the one stop. And there was in many ways, please correct me if you disagree, but an element of luck to Lando's win, and the fact that ultimately he was put on the one stop as a result of what was a pretty bad start. Obviously was 5th by the exit of turn 2, and you'd imagine that had he made a good start, settled into the race in 3rd behind Oscar, remained close to him, that both McLarens would have probably ended up doing the 2-stop, given they would have felt that they could have both beaten Leclerc in what was a battle at the time. I've pointed out already that obviously Oscar maybe has a right to feel a bit hard done by, because he really couldn't do the 2-stop in order to cover both Leclerc but also George Russell. You mentioned that your biggest takeaway, and the fact that, on social media, the fans kind of pointing out that, the kind of the battle between the 2 drivers, Oscar obviously locking up. And I saw a lot of people actually criticizing Oscar for that lock up into turn 1 on lap 69, if I remember correctly. But I think it was interesting because you've obviously seen that happen in Austria as well. And both times McLaren have come onto the radio to say, Oscar, remember, calm down, remember your racing, keep it fair. Both times, though, he's obviously locked up, not hit Lando, obviously very different to what happened in Canada. Do you think we're getting close to the point where it could turn ugly? Because as our stat guru, Jake Nichols, discovered to us, McLaren could seal the Constructors' title as soon as Singapore, which feels absolutely staggering. That's going to leave a lot of races for a straight-out battle for the driver's title between Oscar and Lando. How long do you think they're going to be able to keep it clean and tidy and within McLaren's control before things do perhaps turn ugly, as we have seen in the past from McLaren teammates fighting for titles?
It could turn ugly, but I don't think it will turn ugly because there's an incident. I think things could turn ugly if the incident isn't then responded to in the right way. So if they clash, as long as one of them comes out and says, "Yep, that's on me," owns responsibility, as Lando did in Canada, they will be fine. Where it turns ugly is when there's a clash and they immediately go full Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg and go, that was him. He did it. That's where McLaren will have a real issue on their hands. But they're seemingly learning from those kind of past mistakes. You could cast it back, 30 plus years to Senna and Prost and say, look, there's this DNA in this team of these things happening because of their two number one driver stance. But they would have learned from, kind of Hamilton and Alonso, Hamilton and Rosberg, albeit a different team. So I think it's all about how they respond there. And yeah, in terms of looking at the grander scheme of things, people can say it was unfair that they rolled the dice with Lando. And yes, there is a little bit of luck that comes into it, because whenever you gamble, no matter how calculated that risk might be, there is still luck. You still need the cards or the dice to fall in the way that you need them to. So, but I ultimately think that what would be more unfair is the team saying, no, sorry, we have to do the same strategy for both of you all the time, because Lando's going to be sitting there going, but you're not doing everything you could do to get me in this fight. And yes, it's one team, but you have two smaller teams within that. You have two sides of the garage, and it is their job to put the interests of their driver first. And that is what you see in McLaren. And Oscar was right. There was a gamble on Lando's side. It worked. He couldn't make that gamble himself. It was too big a risk. Lando had nothing to lose. And that's why you saw them go for the one-stop strategy, whereas they didn't with Oscar. And it didn't really become a factor until after Oscar had already pitted. And he said, could we make the one-stop work? By which point, rightly, Tom Stallard came back and said, well, it's going to be difficult from here. It's unlikely that we can do it. Whereas Lando had obviously been put in the position to do so because he fell back. And yeah, you can talk about, luck or, kind of whatever. It will sway one way or the other across the year, because whilst the offset works for Lando here, the alternate strategy won't always work. Sometimes it will be the prime strategy that prevails. So it's going to come out in the wash at some point. So it's very easy to look at one race in isolation and say that was unfair. You've got to look at the entire season.
I think there's I think you're going to like this phrase, guys. I think there's almost now an element of brainwashing that's been going on with Lando and Oscar, because you think back to last season after what happened in Hungary, you think back to last season after what happened in Monza, every message that has come out of McLaren since then, and it was really noticeable from Andrea over the course of the weekend. He was in the team principal's press conference on Friday. He did post-qualifying on Saturday, and obviously his session post-Grand Prix on Sunday as well. And pretty much every single time he was asked about his two drivers going up against one another, he was going on about the principles of racing at McLaren Racing. And he emphasized many times that we are McLaren Racing. And you've got to wonder, after everything that happened between Oscar and Lando last year in Hungary and at Monza, that, as I say, I do feel now that these two guys have it ingrained in their brains that they cannot clash at any cost. Yes, as Sam pointed out, that was a fundamental mistake by Lando running into the back of Oscar in Canada. But in terms of actually when they're racing one another, going alongside one another, they have to stay out of each other's way almost at every cost, because that is the last thing this team wants to see, bearing in mind every single message that has been relayed to them by Zach, by Andrea, since what happened in Monza last year. As I say, for me, as I say, I'm going to use the phrase again because I like it, it's an element of brainwashing, and it's going to be fascinating to see now what's going to happen over these 10 races, and in particular, if they do clinch that title in Singapore, what's going to happen over the final 6 races season, when they will almost be like let off the leash. But even that's almost a moot point, because the constructors' title is wrapped up, done and dusted. 299 points again, did you say, Nick? Is that what 297?
299.
It's done and dusted. So it's almost irrelevant that they're going to win the constructors' title as early as Singapore. It's just them two on their own now, going to go at it for these last 10 races. So it is still going to be fascinating to see. I do like these intra-team battles. I just wish there was a little bit of needle and spice just to add a bit of extra intrigue to it. It's almost like they're too nice and too safe. As I said, I think it's because it's implanted up here. Just look at what happened yesterday in the race when Oscar made that move on Lando at turn 69, Tom Stoddard was quickly on the radio and saying, reminding him of we are McLaren racing almost, we are going racing. So it was like, even then, Oscar's trying to get past and get the victory. And even then, Tom Stoddard is jumping on the radio and reminding him of what McLaren racing is all about. Yeah.
Well, I think, also going for the 200th win. Can you imagine 2 laps out or 1 lap out? And, on the brink of a 200th Grand Prix, win for McLaren, and they do that, it would have been, but I think McLaren to build on his point, McLaren have almost been too good in how they've schooled the drivers and their principles. That it has taken that little bit of kind of needle and spice out of the fight. Whether we see that later on, I don't know, because I think in some ways they'll be almost thinking, well, I've got to think about next year. Because if one of them goes really negative, goes really nasty in how they approach things, which again, very, very slim, chance of that, you've got to think about the next year, because McLaren, there are drivers they can lean on. They could bring, a Gabriel Bortoleto back. There's many things that they could look to do. They're going to be well positioned moving into the new era. I don't think either driver wants to jeopardize his place in that team.
Right, I'm going to put you both on the spot very quickly, because we do have 2 more talking points to get through before Ian has to go put some money in the meter for the car park. So, one-word answer then. Yeah, one-word answer. 9 points between them, 10 rounds remaining. Who wins the title, Lando or Oscar? Sam?
Lando.
Ian?
I'm pausing.
Okay, I'm Oscar.
I don't want to sit on the fence. You're Oscar. I'm Oscar. Lando. Just think Oscar has that little extra degree of calm and coolness about him, and he doesn't make as many mistakes as Lando. Okay. So I'm just going to give him the edge at this stage, but cannot rule out Lando at all.
Well, we'll discuss that point in a lot more detail in next week's podcast, when we'll look back at the opening 14 rounds as a whole. But anyways, moving on very quickly, I want to take a look to the midfield to end this podcast with a couple of things. Ian, first of all, come to you on Aston Martin, the team who, let's not forget, were quite literally at the very back in Spa just over a week ago. Fast forward to last weekend, and remarkable. Both cars in Q3, both cars in scoring massive points for the team, to the point they've jumped to 6th in the standings, only 18 now off Williams in what is becoming a brilliant fight for 5th between Williams, Aston Martin, Stake. We'll discuss them to end the podcast. But Aston Martin, I mean, out of nowhere, Fernando Alonso still got it.
Back row of the grid in Spa, so 5th and 6th on the grid at the Hungaroring, and then producing really great racing and performances as well during the Grand Prix to underline that the 1 lap qualifying on Saturday was no fluke. And yes, as you say, he still got it. He was a bubbly chap, I got to say, in the pen. Do you like that phrase? In the pen, Sunday. But you can't blame him. He's got through so much difficulty, misery this year. Pain. Why not? And pain as well. Yeah, obviously,
quite literally.
Quite literally kept him out of FP1, as we know. Muscular problem in his lower back, and just bounced back and just had a really great weekend. The car, quite naturally, was really well suited to that circuit. The intriguing question is, I asked Fernando in the pen, now you've on the back of this, does this mean now we can see better performances and results in the second half? Well, say second half, we're already into the second half of the season of a 24 race calendar. We've already just done race 14, but nevertheless, post summer break, let's put it that way. His response was, I don't know, because the car is so fluctuating in its performance, as we've seen from one weekend to the next in terms of Belgium and Hungary, that who knows what might happen. He does feel it's going to be good in Zandvoort, so that's something. There you go. Let's get looking. There you go. So that's looking ahead already to the Dutch Grand Prix after the summer break in Zandvoort. So at least there's something for Aston Martin fans to cheer on there potentially.
Right. Final talking point, and Sam, I'll come to you as you are you are the Racing News 365. That's a new one. It's been a long 14 races. Yeah, fake RR. Anyways, you are our Formula 2 gurus. We're going to discuss one of our rookies from Formula 2, and of course the reigning F2 champion Gabriel Bortoleto, who is quickly becoming a bit of a star. It's got to be said. Fernando Alonso believes he's, the best of the new generation coming through. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Finished 6th in Hungary, his personal best result. You've got to think that with the exception of Nico Hülkenberg's podium in Silverstone, actually we're starting to see now Gabriel really kind of take control of that garage. And he's just, given how little experience in an F1 car he had coming into his rookie season compared to some of the others on the grid, like Kimi Antonelli, for example, and particularly Liam Lawson, he's really grown some stature very, very quickly. And more importantly, massive momentum.
Well, I saw before the weekend, obviously the maths on this would change slightly, but someone points out that he had 16% of the points that Nico Hülkenberg had, but yet somehow it feels like he'd had a better season, which I think really kind of underlines just how much Gabriel has taken some people by surprise. And Fernando's comments are particularly kind of enlightening, or kind of maybe pointed, given he manages him. But Isaac Hadjar has taken the first half of the year by storm. He's surprised a lot of people, and he has been the standout rookie performer. Kimi Antonelli is obviously coming highly touted. All of this expectation and weight of expectation, obviously comes with that, as we're now starting to see. But he has been seen as that next generational talent. Gabriel Bortoleto has caught many people by surprise, partly because he doesn't have the same backing that many other drivers do. He had basically had essentially no TPC days in an F1 car until kind of very late last year. Very inexperienced because he didn't have that financial support. But he is incredibly quick, and you are now starting to see that. And also, not only is he quick enough to be pretty consistently outperforming Nico over one lap, you saw his racecraft at the Hungaroring. He kept Max Verstappen behind in the early stages, basically thwarted Max's very early charge through the field. And I mean, that is, you've got to have, say kudos to that in itself, because, it's Max Verstappen at the end of the day. So yeah, Gabriel is quickly showing what he can do, and the talent that basically meant that he was so highly regarded by McLaren. And McLaren are probably looking at that and going, "Oh, that was a really tough thing to let him go." Whether or not there's a buyback clause or anything like that in terms of but like in terms of something that they can do there if they did want to bring him into the team of the future, as I kind of alluded to earlier. So yeah, he's been absolutely exceptional, and I think we're only going to see him get stronger over the second half of the season, unequal half of the season, as that state continues to improve as well.
Guess what? Only time will tell. And on that note, that brings an end to this week's episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. Ian, Sam, amazing as always. Ian, safe travels home and enjoy a holiday you very well deserve. And of course, we've got one more podcast to do before then. So anyways, this has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast from myself, Sam, and Ian. We'll see you next week. See you later.
Very quickly add, folks, I've thrown Nick Golding down a challenge.
Here we go.
Just to finish this off. As we all know, only time will tell has become Nick's catchphrase over the course of this season. So I've said by the Italian Grand Prix, he has to have a cap with that stitched onto it and wear that on one of the shows. So look out for that. That'll be coming to a podcast soon. And thanks for watching and listening as always. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Sign off properly.